Today to introduce two long-serving coaches in the athletics scene.
Some very long-serving.
Very long-serving. And to discuss the 400 and how it sits. And it certainly sits in a unique space in athletics, a space between pure speed and controlled endurance. And because of that, coaches often sit either side of or different ends of the spectrum, from short to high velocity models, nothing over 300 to aerobic heavy systems. And we've got two really experienced coaches here who they'll get to tell their story on how they coach, why they use those methods, and what has worked for them with real life athlete examples. So our viewers can have some context and get an understanding. So welcome Nik Hagicostas and Peter Fortune. So how would I describe Nik in 10 years ago? I would describe him as a versatile, adaptable coach, across lots of disciplines, and Mr. Fortune, in knowing you since I was 14, so for nearly 45 years, a humble journeyman, I would say, in athletics, and that's understanding it. But we might start off, Nik, if you can give us a few. And when I say a few, for you, speaking and cutting you short is something that I'll probably do quite a lot in this next 60 minutes. But a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go to Fort.
I've got a very broad background across all the events, from being a national multi-events coach, but also having been away with national teams as a therapist. I've also worked in high performance in both soccer, the AFL, and a number of other sports within the institute system. Internationally. So I've brought some of the benefits from the team sports culturally into an individual sport, which I think has really helped me develop my coaching philosophy and seen my group more like a team rather than treating them all as individuals. And I think that's something that I think has, and I've worked in dance and stuff like that. So very broad background, and all those areas of expertise that I've been fortunate enough to experience have, I think, shaped my coaching philosophy.
Cool. Okay. Peter?
Not quite similar, but I've been more athletically oriented most of the time, from when I was young. So it's always been athletics involvement, and not much a little bit in team sports, but not very much. I've done some work with Carlton Football Club, but more on an individualised basis than a team basis. I did some work with the Silvanis, father and son. So I've done a little bit of work in team sports, but very much individual sport based. But also, to concur, I do try to treat my group as a team as much as they are a group of individuals. And I suppose we get on to philosophy. I suppose my philosophy with 400 metres is specificity and possibly a fair workload.
More like you jump straight to the first question, which I really love. So, Nik, what would be your 400 metre training philosophy?
I suppose if you look at what I do, it's basically a short to long approach. I think that's the main theme. I start people on the short, improve their technical proficiency, and really focus on max velocity. And then once I'm comfortable with that, we then move into more volume, but high quality volume.
So a follow-up for if max velocity is Nik's main focus, what would be your most important quality for your training?
Well, I probably differ a little bit in as much as because I'm much older, I come from the pre-short to longs. So I've probably grown up as a long to short.
Yep.
But I appreciate short to long, and I've done I've changed in some ways to doing that a bit more. But I'm probably philosophically and historically, I'm probably long to short, without losing sight of the requirement for speed. I'm probably not. I am keen on max velocity, but I'm probably more keen on specificity of the event demand rather than a particular element of the event demand. So it's probably more of a totality of, obviously, a 400 runner needs a lot of speed, so you can't neglect it. But I probably ally that to probably a fairly solid workload, which I was lucky enough to be able to do with one athlete because they were very resilient and could do it and could sustain quite a high workload. That was Freeman, but tried to do it with other athletes as well, but they're not always as resilient as she was.
And I think we'll get to that, the athlete type later on, and when are they ready for different training systems and methodology, and when should juniors be introduced to different systems of training? So, but no, thank you. What we do, and it's great, Peter, that you mentioned Kathy, and we'd like to, in our discussion, sort of use real life examples, because I think that really gives the viewers some context on what we're looking at, and helps make sense. In relation to speed versus endurance, probably a core discussion around here. Using an athlete that you've coached, Nick, how does your training model prepare them for the final 100 of a 400 metres?
Well, I can give you two examples. One is a male and one is a female.
Absolutely.
Are different. Aidan is purely...
So Aidan Muphy?
Aidan Muphy,
yes.
Sorry. Aidan Muphy is a very high quality sprinter who's now drifting out or evolving into a 400 metre runner. And the other one that I'll use is Charlotte McAuliffe, who's won 2 national titles in the under-20s, who came to me as an 800, 1500 metre girl. So what we developed with her was building some speed, knowing that she had a reasonable aerobic base, and she's found that the 400 has suited her. She may one day drift out, but what we've been able to develop with her is high quality max V, and not necessarily having to do a lot of volume, because aerobically she was pretty gifted, like she could swim pretty well. So we were fortunate enough that I didn't have to put in the volume of work, because she had a reasonable base when she came to me. But she came
so
to
the benefits of cross training there for her before she came to you sort of helped.
Yeah, and then if you look at another extreme is Rose Pittman, that came to me as a cross country runner, and we turned her into a 4.8 runner. So I think it's really important to understand that each one of these athletes has particular strengths, and you have to work on those strengths, but you've got to try and broaden their skill set to be able to cover the 4, because the 4 is probably one of the toughest events physically on the program.
So Aidan was a 200, probably known for a 200 specialist, and he's branching out. He's really versatile this season, like running a 10.21 and a 20.4, and then he's 44.8. How are you moving him out to the 400? Is it a bang, he's going to run 3 rounds at nationals? Is he just going to cherry pick in his development and focus more on the 2 this year because he's not ready? What does that look like for him?
We always had a 2-year plan, and we were always going to focus on the 2 for the first 2 years to maximise his max V, but gradually introducing 400s, and we've limited the number of 4s he's done. Like this year, I think this will be his 3rd run. And the way we've opened him up during the winter was we worked out that these were the velocities he needed to run, as Peter said, specificity. And I worked out that when we first started doing it, he could maintain that sort of velocity at about 150, not too bad. Then we dropped him back down to about 125, and then gradually over the course of the winter we kept on adding 25 metres into each of the reps to maintain that quality. So he got an understanding of the type of rhythm that he needed, and he could repeat that. So we're now up to 325 metres, where we started off at 150 and then drop back down. So it's taken a long time to do that. And the reason that I've done that is he'd come to me 2 years prior and hadn't got through a year without an injury. So for me, it was about building resilience. And I needed the qualities that I thought were really important was the max V. And with that came a whole lot of physical qualities that it comes with. But now you're not going to survive with max V in a multi-round championship.
Okay.
And that's what I'm going to have a discussion with Peter about that later. So, and looking forward to it. But it's a matter, I've been very patient. He's 22 years old. You know, I think he's still got a lot of growth left in him.
He's 22. He's got lots of time, doesn't he? Just about the patience, really. And Peter, what about you? How does your system of training really, or model, help prepare them for the final 100?
Well, if you're using Catherine as an example, well, she was a double peak athlete, basically, because her main season was September, August, September. But we would have to do, well, we would do the domestic Australian stuff as well. So it was, if you like, sort of two peaks, although it was more, the second was more of a peak than the January or February. That was really running whilst training. So she occasionally would even train on the day that she raced 400. I'm saying that should be for everyone, but it happened a few times. But it was mainly with her. She came from 100 metres, so she was very much sprint based. She wasn't an endurance athlete, despite she and others wanting to think about 800, but never did very much. But she came from the 100 metres, 200, and the 4 came fairly quickly because I looked at the way she ran and I thought 400 as soon as I saw her. So it was a case of, we'll probably work towards that. But at the time she was as number one or two in the country at 200. So we did the 2. The first world champ she went as a 200 metre runner. But before that she went to the Olympics as a 400 metre runner. But that was a junior and it's very early on. But so she was speed based, and so the speed levels were quite already there. So I was mainly looking to build the ability to sustain a strong training program. So that she did a lot of work, but we didn't work aerobically per se, a lot of traditional aerobic stuff. She didn't go for long runs and that sort of stuff. But her maximum distance in training would have been 500 metres, which she did quite a few of, but not multiples, usually 1 or 2 reps in a session, the most. But so we worked basically from, say, 100 metres through to 500 as her main training emphasis. And that was multiple reps with limited recoveries to build her endurance, because you can build your aerobic capacity without doing aerobic running, according to a scientist I spoke to. You get a lot of aerobic, you get enough aerobics to satisfy the energy system demands for 400 metres from the fast training you will do. You'll pick up a byproduct of that is a certain amount of the aerobic system contributes.
And I think that's a similarity, really, isn't it? That's exactly what you were talking about before, Nick, and in our previous conversations. And doing the 500s, like, say, 2 in a session, the danger of losing speed in doing over distance, or is it more of a confidence thing that the athlete can sort of overreach the 4 and feel more strong?
We wanted them mentally to know that they can go further than 400. But it was more training. It was more purely training effect. They weren't at 400 pace, and they couldn't be really.
No, not really.
But they were sub-maximal by and large. But like one of the sessions we often did was 5-4-3-2, and we just did those, and they, depending on the time of year, the recoveries changed. But they were fairly long recoveries because she wasn't an athlete. She wasn't a 1500 metre runner who can double up fast work with a half-a-minute recovery sort of thing. She needed recovery time to keep the quality at the level we wanted.
And the right technical model.
Yes, and the right technical. And she wasn't a perfect technician, but she wasn't bad. And that's probably a regret that I might have now, that I didn't do enough technical training with her.
Okay.
But I've got a few regrets about things, but not many with her. But I could have maybe spent a bit more time technically on her. Not so much.
She might have liked that in less 500s.
Might have. Not necessarily. Well,
Yeah.
she got inured to a degree of doing a fair bit of work. So I think she might have got. She may have. You're right. She might.
And what was the thoughts in training prior to a 400 race?
Well, the usual sort of you wouldn't you'd try definitely not to overwork people because you don't really want them going into a competition tired. So we would build in, like she raced in 2000. She raced consistently in Europe as you sort of needed to really in those days. Probably still do, probably more now. We'd run in Europe, and then you have to come back to Australia and things like that because the Olympics were here, so you used to come back, and we'd keep reasonable workload going till quite close. In her case, because that's what she was sort of accustomed to. Yeah, so it was, but a lot of it was as it gets closer, its specificity goes higher. It gets more like the 400 and less like over distance 400 training. Wouldn't have done too many fives in the last couple of months before the Olympics, but it was more. It was very much really training. If you like it, I like to train between the slowest pace in a 400 and the fastest pace in a 400.
Yeah, sure.
Which is in a woman, it's roughly 7.5 meters per second to 10 meters a second.
More like.
So most of the training was in that area. Like the longer stuff with shorter recoveries might have been nearer the last 50 of the 4, and a lot of training is because you've got to get them very efficient in the first 300, especially the first 220 or 30.
Now, Nick, you also technically look at your race model and meters per second and everything. How does that fit in with what Peter's talking about?
I totally agree with him. I think he's being a bit harsh on Kathy, and technically, she mightn't have looked technically proficient, but when her foot hits the ground and you look at her trunk position, it was exceptional. So
now I know, but just to come in on that, in hindsight, I would have worked a bit more on improving her running around the bend. I didn't have too much trouble with her straights. It was more the bends because she was a long stride. For her size, she was an enormously long strider. She had a longer stride than Michael Johnson. More like.
It was about 2.3, wasn't it? 2.3.
Well, she'd hit 2.3 on occasions, but it's quite for a person 5 foot. Well, a person 157 or 160 odd meters tall. She had a very long stride, and that was her natural thing. She naturally slipped into that. So it didn't necessarily suit the 200 meter bend. I didn't have a major drama in fours, but 200s. And well, she won a 400 world championship in lane 1, but it's 400 is a bit different to the 2.
We sort of talked about the balance between speed and lactate training, but what sort of adaptations or key adaptations or responses do you look for to know your program is working or it's not, Nick?
I think when we're going through a really heavy phase, and we all do that at some stage where you slowly build up, I keep coming back to how much is this impacting on them. So I have a baseline of what their max speed is. So 30s are my bread and butter. So we do them at the beginning of every session. We do 3 of them, and I know what their bandwidth is.
And what sort of recovery would you, if we get specific, would you do that to get all right?
Maybe it's when it's in winter and it's cold, you need to be a little bit. You've got to adjust things. In summer when it's really hot, you can have them a bit longer. But if they turn up after we've done something, say for example on a Tuesday we've done some longer reps, and they've turned up on Thursday and their 30s times are out of whack, well then you know that you probably overcooked them. And you modify your session. And I think everybody will use some benchmark.
Yep.
And as you get better, Peter would do the same, I'm sure. The stopwatch goes into your pocket and you watch what they're doing and the rhythm and what's happening on the ground. Because I think at times we can be we can focus on the stopwatch. We can become romantic with the stopwatch. The stopwatch doesn't tell you everything.
No, it certainly doesn't. And my base, if you like, was 60 metres.
Okay.
I don't know why, but it was.
Well, we do 6s as well, Peter, but it's
So that was
not-
my base. I didn't get much into. No,
And you would clock that, or you just watched
no, I
it?
clocked it.
Yeah, right.
I did clock it because that was my, if you like, my guide, a bit of a guide as to how their speed was going. It would come at the start of a session, it wouldn't be the session, it would just be at the start. And I did that with all athletes, Lauren Hewitt and a few others. And I got an idea because I devised a method of timing, which I thought lent consistency. It wasn't designed to be a 60-metre time trial. We used 60 metres as lines, but I did it off first foot down to the finish. I didn't do it from somebody saying go. I wanted actual running time. So it was first foot down, which meant it was probably 59 metres.
Yep.
And it was rolling start. So I wasn't trying to get the world record at 60 metres or having something that I could compare to the world record for 60 metres.
And if they were
That
off,
was my timing.
on that,
Well,
how would you adjust your session?
I'd probably say, well, this is this is a development I don't like. And I think they were all pretty well consistent. I don't remember ever saying, oh, God, that's terrible. But it probably would change. That session, interestingly, maybe differently to Nick, that might drive me more to doing something more submaximal.
Okay.
Maybe longer and more submaximal rather than, well, not trying to flog a horse that's probably not quite ready to do it. So I might do something more submaximal. But most of the time, they would adapt quite well and show similar times. And I used to try and use with good sprinters, around for a girl, because I'm coming at this more from the point of view as maybe more of a female sprint coach rather than a male one. Because I think there are some differences and some observations, which we might come into a bit later. But I just wanted to, I'd look around the 7-second mark as a sort of Lauren could on a good days could break 7 for my little exercise, and Freeman probably was not as fast because you wouldn't. Catherine always had a bit of a reserve most of the time in her training, because to run at her best, she really needed the impetus of heavy comp. She wanted to beat people and win.
And that moves
And
into
training
our
wasn't
next part.
always winning.
That's really interesting. So how did you structure or expose race specific intensity across the season to get someone like Kathy up?
Well, it was just training sessions, I suppose, but it was also, a race plan, which it took a while to develop the race plan. And Catherine, it was very in the finish because she had a couple of bad experiences with an incorrect race plan, not always supplied by me, but she had a couple of bad experiences, and she resolved on her own that she said, I don't like that. I don't want to do that. And classic example was Gothenburg 1995 in the 400 where Perec was in it, and she decided that the way to go is to be ahead of Perec the whole way, 300 metres. And Perec was pretty quick. She was a 21-point runner. So she hit the straight and wasn't conditioned enough at that stage and ran out of petrol and missed a place. I think third or fourth, that she nearly stopped. She was so exhausted. And she didn't like that at all. And she only ever did it once more after that. And that was not my instructions. But she ran against Guevara.
Your race plan, should it be defined by your training guide where you're up to?
Yeah. If you don't use the metrics you're collecting to model your race plan, you're kidding yourself, because what you do at training, you have to then somehow use those jigsaw puzzles and find the best fit.
Yep.
Now, it's just great that Peter and I do the same thing. He uses 60, I use 30. But I also do it from first foot forward. Now, we generally do it from the 3-step rolling. So that way they're not blasting it. There's a little bit of a control. And I'm like Peter, generally I ask them to be 3 steps behind the line. And so the first foot is somewhere around about where the line is, sometimes a bit further. And in 30s you get a little bit more variation, but we do also do 60s. So before we do any specific race modelling for the 4, we will always do a flying 60. And that helps me determine what, because I break the race down into 50-meter bits, and we have target markers to be able to give feedback. And so I broke the whole race down into 50-meter bits, and because, and that's how we worked our race model. And I think some people use hundreds or 200 parts. I just think in a training model, when you're building someone's understanding of the event, I think that the 102 for a lot of the kids is just a long way to run. Whereas if you can work 50, then 100, then 150, and then 2, I think it gives them a better reference point. That's certainly what I've found, particularly with the young kids.
Pete, I was really interested what you said before about the differences in training for males and females, and I suppose over the last 27, 8 years, mostly been females for you, as a sprints coach. And Nick, you're doing both males and females predominantly. So what I'd love to know from you, Peter, what you think are your main observations and what you factor into your programming.
Well, I actually, it's controversial. I don't think there's that much difference in the training of males and females, but I think where maybe some mistakes are made, I'm not convinced that females do sufficient work.
Okay.
Because one of the things, I've written the odd article back in the day, and I worked out that a fair guide is an athlete should be able to double their 100 time in the 200. So whatever they can run for 100, they should be able, if you multiply by 2, that should be their 200 time. Now, a lot of men do it quite well. Not a lot of girls do it that well. And I don't think there's a reason for that, particularly. Apart from the fact, I'm not sure that the workloads are the same. So
in the gym or on the track, or both?
In the
in the gym?
Oh, I think it's probably on the track more. People are doing a lot more gym probably now than they were 20 years ago anyway. But I think it's all part of it. But I think they not many girls can double their 100 time for a 200. Now, Freeman ran 11.2 and she ran 22.35. Pretty well double. And she was, if you like, an endurance 200 runner because she was running 4s at the time. But a lot of people can't. And going even further now, we're delving a bit into 200 here, but that's all part of it. But they also should be, a person should be able to run the last 100 of a 2 faster than the first 100 of a 2. But a lot of people can't. Now, when you think of it, the last 100, there's fatigue. There's also flying start. You're hitting it at 10 metres a second. Well, in a good woman's case, 10 metres a second, a male, 12 metres a second. So it really should be a lot faster. But in a lot of cases, it's not. That's where I'm coming from. I don't know that the workload or work, whatever it is, to get that ability is always in the training program.
What have you found, Nick?
The same. Most of my girls can double. I don't think my top 3 girls all run faster 2s than they run 100s. And they're not snatchers in the 100, but and certainly Aidan, I think, in the next few weeks is going to do some damage to that 200 time. If he's run 10.23, we haven't spent any time doing any acceleration mechanics stuff this year because we focus more on going to 4 rather than spending time in the 100. There's only so much time in a year, and you've got to think about the benefits that you're going to get. So I agree with Peter. I think it may be 2 things, Peter. One, the boys are a lot taller. I think that has a capacity, but I also think they're also relatively stronger.
Oh, true, exactly, and that's one of the things. But I think that can be, some of that can be minimised because the strength aspect of it, if you like, the size aspect, they don't run as fast for the 100.
No.
So I think the principle still can apply.
Is
what I'm saying.
Okay. What about risks and trade-offs? What's the biggest risk in your training approach, Nick?
Because we do very high max velocity, if you haven't adapted and given people time to adapt, the risk of injury is high. So when people come into my program, they get a bit annoyed, "Oh, but they're doing something else." Yeah, but they've had 12 months or 2 years of high speed exposure. You're coming from someone who's done rep 3s and 4s and whatever, and you want to do that, you're going to hurt yourself. So it's a matter of convincing them to buy into the process. And we get technical, we still give them speed work, but nowhere near the same dosage. And in a lot of cases, I have to work on their technical model, but the risks are higher. The rewards can be great too, but if you don't manage that risk, you're going to break them very quickly. It is a very risk-avert program.
And the advantage for you in that program is that your background in therapy
Mhm.
and strength conditioning,
Yep.
and your understanding of the technical model, you can adjust and
Yep.
you can build certain developments in the athlete profile to sort of be able to cope with that type of
And I
training.
see it, and I've got a reasonably strong therapist, so with a lot of experience in a broad range of events. So when you see people's gait changing, I've got the ability at training to be able to trigger something or treat it very quickly and go, "Oh, we've changed that, so look, there's an issue," and then we modify. Now that's not something that most coaches would feel comfortable doing, and I don't expect them to do that. But having a good network of people around you, and I'll say this clearly, what you see in the rooms is not what you see on the track. So people can pass tests clinically, they won't necessarily pass Peter's and my test on the track. So when they say, "Oh, they're ready to go," and we see them and go, "No, they're not," and that happens so often. No different to when I'm in the footy clubs, is the doctors and the physios go, "Oh, they're ready to play." I go, "Well, they're not playing until they do a max V test out there, and I've got some baselines," and invariably that exposes that weakness. So we run. So therefore, we should assess someone's availability, not clinically, but what they do functionally.
See, Nick has an advantage over most average coaches because he's got the background.
Yes.
So can almost be a team in himself. Whereas I'm very keen on the idea that an athlete must develop a team. It's getting back to team stuff. It's a team of, it's got to be a team, and you have your experts in your team. And most coaches can't be all of those. So you need to develop the right team. That's half of the battle, is working at the team. But you do need the team, I think, and it was quite important that Freeman had a team, tried and true, and they'd been with her for quite a while, and they're able to work with her. She had a massage therapist who travelled with her, which was good. So she was treated after every training session. Not everyone can have that.
No.
That wonderful thing to do, and that was in Europe, when she was travelling, so it was all very good. Most of the time she could travel with her coach and with her therapist, so that was good for her.
And who did her strength conditioning? Was that your
I did.
Yeah, okay. So you
I did. Now I wouldn't, if I was doing it now, I probably wouldn't, because I started to get annoyed at having to go to the gym. I'm not a lover of going to the gym that much, but I did with her for 11 years.
Okay.
But so I did, because in those days, going back a bit now, there weren't that many strength and conditioning people around. So it's now become, a profession in itself.
Yes.
We did use a institute strength and conditioning for a little while. When I got back into I wasn't coaching for about a year at one point. When I got back into it, and I was all for the strength and conditioning coach taking it over and being the strength coach, and I said, but it didn't work.
And why didn't it work? Like what?
Well, her then husband said she's getting very tired for it, very tired all the time, and so they were long sessions.
Yeah.
And because when it's your profession, you can get a bit carried away. And she did a lot of work.
The dialogue between you and that strengths coach, like did it align with it?
I don't think we totally hit it off, but we're all right. But I just said, well, if she's not happy, I said, well, we'll go back to what we did 7 or 8 years before that.
Yeah.
And then we trained at a particular gym, and I basically did. And it was simple strength. It wasn't any. There was no great modern strength and conditioning. It was simple stuff, squats and bench, even bench, which means bench has gone out of business. Nobody does bench.
It's not trendy anymore.
Well, it's lost its trendiness. I don't mind a bit of bench.
Bench. It's good for the boys because it's good for their testosterone.
You do that at Kaiser, don't you? You still do that? Okay.
Well,
The
you
bench.
can. Well, you can. Well,
You do.
well, they're all machines. We did 3 weights, but anyway, but so I did her strength work, but I probably wouldn't if I had turned up Captain Freeman turned up with me now, and I wanted to coach her at my age, I would probably look for an expert. Because otherwise I don't really. I'm sort of too old now to want to be doing training 7 days a week all the time.
What's wrong with you? I'm not sure, Peter.
No,
Well, I guess.
it's real all the time. 30 or 40 years of that. These days, my age, looking for a slightly easier life. Probably why I don't coach that many elite athletes at the moment.
It's difficult, isn't it, Nick? Because you also have worked with, you've been part of the South Australian Institute of Sport and dealt with like Aidan when he first came back across, being with Fitzy, and he had a strength coach there. Is he still doing strength through there? Or is he now doing strength with you? Or
I do all of it. And to support Peter, I think the difficulty we have, if you have too many people working in silos, it becomes it's difficult to manage the loads. And everybody that comes into a program feels that they're part of it, so that they feel they've got to contribute a lot. At the end of the day, I'm there. We look at what's happened the night before. How do you feel? We modify.
Yeah. Okay.
If they don't quite understand what 300s or 630s at max velocity or 360s, whatever we've done, and to modify and go, look, I also need him ready for Thursday. So if you smash him in the gym today, I think if possible, the coach has to drive the strength and conditioning. Doesn't mean he has to supervise it, but has to be the primary driver of what needs to happen and communicate. That's why I've just made it. It's very easy for me. I've just taken time to do that. And in the last 2 years, that's really worked well for him. I saw what the issues were with Aidan previously in terms of his injuries. And I thought, well, the easiest way to solve this is to have less input, have one person driving the majority of it, from the therapy, the coaching, and all the other sports science stuff. And it's worked really well for him. Will that continue that way? It depends on resources, and as an athlete evolves, there are other inputs that potentially may come into play that will help. And as Ford has said, it will be Team Murphy moving forward. But Andrew Murphy and I, who get on really well, he's very similar to me, but he has other inputs because he can't deal with them all the time either. So it's a matter of juggling the jigsaw puzzles and the time, and time's the biggest resource and the most complex resource for us to manage as coaches, I think.
Well, coaches, and you've got your own life, and you've got your own business, and you need to feed your son and do everything like that. So we understand those sort of issues. If we move away from performance, we move to youth development. I mean, there's lots of coaches and lots of young kids who run fours. The Laths don't necessarily run fours, or at schools, in primary schools, and they'll go the 1, 2 to the 8 at the School Sport Australia. How should training differ for a 14 to 18-year-old compared to a senior athlete in the 400, Peter? What would you?
Well, I think hopefully they do less work.
Yeah.
Hopefully they do less work. Like, I think it's part of you're trying to develop the organism at that point, I think, rather than saying, well, you're 14, we'll train you like Michael Johnson. I think you've got part of it's a whole thing. You've got to let them develop in all kinds of areas, and not just athletically. You've got to give them their chance to, if you like, to have their life, social life, their sporting life. And it may be that at 14, it's possibly a good thing they're not specialising.
Okay.
I think a lot of people specialise. Well, in a lot of events, a lot of athletics. Athletics is the fundamental of most of the other sports.
Yes.
So if you're going to do anything, athletics is a good thing to do, because even if you're a team sport person, it'll probably stand you in good stead, and you'll be a better footballer or better anything else if you've got an athletics background. Like, I think also a wonderful fundamental is gymnastics, but I wouldn't really want any child of mine to do competitive gymnastics
Okay.
based on certain things that have clearly gone on.
Look, it's certainly someone
but
attended a school swimming and gymnastics at an early age, to the age of 8, and swimming a little bit longer is an awesome foundation for any
I
sort
think
of
it's a terrific foundation, and
Yeah.
I love it when people say, I do gymnastics, but when I say, oh, you're not going to do competitive. I know I don't do competitive, but I think it's a great background, and athletics is a great background for most of the other sports. Because you've got to be able to, you've got to be able to run, and especially if you look at the AFL now, they're getting faster and faster. But it's still handy to be very fast, like former athlete Max Holmes in Geelong, who's clearly, I think, probably, to my way of thinking, the fastest player in the AFL. I don't think anyone's quicker than him, even though he wasn't a sprinter particularly. He was a 400 hurdler, but he's fast, and he won the AFL sprint. Not to be that fast to do that.
No, I wouldn't worry about that. No, that's
he played. He just played
really.
and won by 5 metres, looking around, smiling. So, because they didn't bother putting anyone decent against him, but it's a great foundation. But I don't think at 14, especially girls, should be too specialising, and especially if they're doing distance running. But that's not our. But that's another podcast, I reckon.
What about you, Nick? How do you? I mean, I know you had Charlotte, and you had her at the age of probably 14 or 15.
11. I started.
Okay.
11. So she won the national multi-events championship under 16, and what she did, hurdles, throws, wasn't particularly good at throws, and I believe, because she came to me as an 8:15 runner, I wasn't sure where she was going to go. And it was probably after 16 that we decided that she'll give the 400 a go, and that's when she won her first national junior title at the age of 16. So I think it's really important that the kids get a taste of everything, not just if they, you get kids who say, oh, I'm just an 800 runner. Well, how about you do some sprinting and you do some high jump and some long jump? Now, I know that's really hard to palate for some parents. I've had a young parent recently whose child's pretty good. She's 12 years old. I needed to get faster. She's going to be a world-class 1,500 metre runner. Well, how about we go back a step and get her to run fast in the 100? But she wants to run 15. Well, the fastest 1,500 women in the world can run very, very fast, of course.
Are young athletes being exposed to too much lactate-based work too early?
Yeah, and it affects their speed, and it is very demanding on the system, and it breaks them mentally as well if they do too much. And there's kids that I watch out at training, and they would do 3 times as much as my senior athletes, and perception is that we don't do enough work, so we're not fit.
Okay, we talked about overtraining or too much lactate work based too early for young athletes. How does recovery play a role in the type of training and how you coach, Nick?
Well, it's really important. People don't view it as a unit. They just do it. You actually have to program it in. So it's really important that when you do have something that you know is going to be very difficult, the leading in sessions and the leading out sessions need to be managed, and then what you do in between. We don't do a lot of consecutive days, so we do weights or we do some pull work or go for a walk. And I think walking is a very underrated recovery tool, and it's really important to gauge that. And a good indicator is, are they sleeping better? When they start to get tired, they find that they don't sleep as well. So,
So you're over those sort of metrics?
Yeah, majority of them. Right. And you try and educate the kids to be able to manage that themselves. And then if I see them feeling tired or whatever, we'll talk about those. But I try and get the athletes to take control of that, because in a group, and depending if you've got a large group, it's really hard to keep on top of every one of those metrics. But you give them the tools to be able to understand the input. Sleep's a really critical one. If they're constantly waking up and still feeling tired, potentially that could be a good sign, particularly for young kids, that they aren't recovering sufficiently.
What about you, Ted? We mentioned it before.
Well, as I said, with elite athletes, that can be programmed in every day. Like when she was traveling in Europe, she was basically treated every day.
Hmm.
And it's not, everyone can't get that, but they can, there are a lot of modalities, and you've got all kinds of things now, like compression boots and things that athletes buy and wear. But sleep is probably the number one modality for recovery, really. And if they're not getting enough sleep, well, it'll show up. It'll bite them in the bum. And so you can do all kinds of things, pools, and there's lots of things they can do it. But the higher up they go in the sport, the more they need to focus on their recovery, I think.
The quality of the recovery determines the outcome of the performance.
Okay.
It certainly helps the outcome of the performance.
And school age kids just coming from the school system, they've got a lot going on. Kids who are doing VCE and all their SACs and everything, and they might be doing other seasons of sport, and then they're coming and they're doing ATS training, and they might have some gym as well. Sometimes you do have to look at all the other things that they're doing.
It's true.
And so it is day off. Just go and study, just do nothing. It is, and use your other sort of.
Well, I think if you've got that situation, I think you've got to, as Nick was saying, you've got to program the recovery days. And if a young kid doing a bit of training, and they've got all this other stuff happening, well, they just don't train every day.
No, that's right.
The school program, hopefully, most school programs are pretty good like that.
Oh, they're great. Our school program's elite.
But just on that, Mark, I think one of the things that's really important, people that view we have to do this amount of work. If the kids are playing school soccer or football, they're getting enough aerobic work.
Yeah.
So all you need to then do with their athletics training is keep it short, sweet, which is something they're not getting in their footy. And that's a really good way of minimising it, because the number of kids I see in the clinic, and then you look at their program and they're doing AS twice a week, they're playing 2 games of soccer and they're training twice a week. So that's a lot of volume of work. And, and particularly I've found girls between 14 and 18, high risk of stress fractures, which we've seen a lot of over the journey. You don't see as many of those sort of problems with the boys, but they play netball on a hard surface, they come out and run, bang, and you probably see more lower limb stress reactions in females than you do in males.
True enough.
Okay. Last question to finish off. What's probably the most important piece of advice you would give a coach developing 400-meter athletes, Peter? Okay.
Good question. Well, I think you've got to look at the totality of what the requirements of the event are, and it needs to be. You need to work on. They've got to be fast. There's not much point in a slow 400-meter runner, because that's what they are, a slow 400-meter. They've got to have a speed. We'll get into speed reserve. You've got to have a speed reserve. In other words, you've got to be able, if you want to run 50 seconds, you've got to be able to certainly run 25 seconds for it too. Because if you can't do it 25, you'll never do 50 seconds, no matter what you do. But you need to be, it gets into a little bit of race planning, and it's another area, but I think you can't.
Okay.
You've got to have the speed reserve so that you can do the aspects of the race at the required speed that you need to do to achieve the goals that you've got. So if you're a 50-second female trying to do 50 seconds, and you've got to be probably in the 22s.
Okay.
As a sprint, as a 200, you can't really divorce. I don't think a 400-meter runner can divorce themselves from the 200 meters. Some are doing, but I don't think it's a wise thing. I think you've got to always keep the fact that you have a good speed. To go back to Sydney, just briefly on Freeman, she was at the time the fastest sprinter in the race, 200 times. And I suspect the strongest, tactically and condition-wise. So the combination of being the fastest and the strongest, these really means that you really should win the race, unless you stuff up your race plan. And she was very cautious and careful about race plan, even though now she doesn't fully agree, I don't think. But she wanted the race plan, and I devised a race plan I thought would win the race.
Yep.
Not necessarily run the fastest time. So I think you must have the speed. So if you can't get away from fast running.
Okay.
And you can do all the other. When you've got the speed right, then you can then do some building. I think you've got to get the speed pretty well first to be able to achieve what you want to achieve.
Okay. Nick?
Totally agree. So, and that's what we've done with Aidan is a really good example, is we're trying to get his 200 time down into the low 20s, because then the speed reserve going through, if he wants to run sub 44, or even call it 44, he's going to have to be able to go through the 200 in 20.8.
Yeah.
So if he goes, and if he can run 20.1, it's going to make it a lot easier running 20.8 on the way through. I think that the event is somewhat changing. There's been a number of people now who have not negative split, but had even splits for the first and second two.
Okay.
It's rare to see those beasts. They are unique. Most people will have a 1.5 to 2 second difference between their first two and the second two, which is what a majority of us. I'm trying to build that, and I think that takes a lot longer to develop than people think. It's not just, and I've tried to play around with that as a race model, but it is very, very difficult to engage people with it. To answer your question, building a robust athlete from the ground up, and this takes time and patience. And as Peter said, it's really important to build your speed. But I also think don't progress them if they're young kids too early into the 4. Give them a taste of the 4. 2 or 3 races a year, rather than doing them week in, week out and in the club. I think they are a brutal event. The 4.
If you've got the speed, you can then develop the fast relaxed that you need to do in a 4. If you haven't got the speed, well, then it's a hard run the whole way, and you've got to be very strong. 2 race plans with Freeman. Atlanta and Sydney were totally different race plans, and you could say which one was the most successful. One was a gold medal, one was a silver medal. The gold medal was 24-1, 25-0.
Okay.
Silver medal was 23-2,
Okay.
25-4. Now, one was 0.5 half a second faster. I mean, that was based around, in a way, the fact that she'd run against Perec in the first one, so that was always going to be fast. Catherine was more inexperienced at that point, and very competitive, so felt she had to go at that speed. Didn't finish it off quite that well, but pretty good. Sydney, she was very strong. And because of her speed reserve, 22, because it was very easy to find the speed reserve in Sydney because she ran the 200 as well. So we had a 200 time, we had a 400 time, very easy. 22.5, 49.1. So 22.5 went through in 24.1. Well, that's 1.6 seconds as a first 200, which is quite a lot. But then her last, she didn't slow down all that much.
No.
So it's just a different thing. Now, one was if you like, the more difficult race plan was the fastest, but it was also vulnerable. Because I do like to train an athlete to the point where hopefully with a good race plan and proper conditioning, they will finish the event strongly. Because a lot of races are lost in the last 20 or 30 metres, in both the 2 and the 4.
Yes.
Yeah, I think.
Right, gentlemen, thank you for your time and for the discussion. It's been really fascinating and lots of key messaging, I think, for different sorts of coaches in different sorts of styles. But I like the idea of just don't rush the process and take your time and observe what's going on. Take a step back and get some advice and get your team around you.
Team.